Okay, let's move on. And Dr. Cole got a great guest on. I think one of the best guests our listeners are going to hear all year. We've got former NFL player, former Chicago Bears safety, Doug Plank, with us. Doug played 9 seasons with the Bears, played college football at Ohio State under Woody Hayes, and known as one of the hardest hitters ever to play in the NFL. He's a guy that I loved when I was growing up, watching the Bears play, and I don't know how he's able to walk and talk today, and I mean that in a positive way because he's very articulate, you'll find out. But do you remember Doug Plank, Dr. Cole?
I do. I was just thinking, Steve, we had this expression where we used to play this game where we basically, you just get the ball and you just tackle the guy, and you just smear the guy with the ball, and we used to say you got planked. Doug, having grown up in Chicago, I remember you just the spirit or essence of you. It's funny because when you hear your name, it's like a visceral thing. It's associated with the kind of player you were. And I guess now, fast forward, how many years has it been, Steve? How many years?
My last year was 1984 as far as football was concerned. So the time has gone by, 36 years?
Right. So fast forward, now we're going to talk about the wrath that your what you contributed to our history has played on your body. So as Steve said, it's going to be great to have you on the show.
Yeah. So Doug, take us back to the beginning when you and I talked before, and I'm going to start with this. You said you took 100 stitches as a child. So this is something you were kind of born with, this attitude to be fierce, and football was made for you, huh?
Well, growing up in Western Pennsylvania, same place Mike did grew up. There literally were a lot of coal miners, blue collar. My father worked in a factory his whole life. So, it was toughness, and football was really, the number one sport in the area, as evidenced by the love for the Steelers now. But it was something that you had to be a tough guy. And I remember back when I was a kid growing up, we were always doing things like climbing trees and climbing cliffs. And so when the injuries happened, they happened rather dramatically. They were big gashes, concussions, things like that, because kids were fighting and throwing rocks at each other. And a 10 or 11-year-old could back in the 60s, go out down in the woods with a shotgun. You would see, it was not uncommon to see kids 12, 13 years old walking down the street with, rifles, shotguns, going out into the woods, shooting things. So it was just a different time. And, so toughness was really a key. And if you didn't get 100 stitches by the time you were 9 years old, you were a sissy, as they said. And so toughness, you didn't complain about injuries, pain. I remember very few times ever going to the doctor, occasionally just to get, my stitches, get gashes sewed up. That was about it. And toughness was the way to go. And when I got to be...
How old were you when you first played football?
My mother, in fact, I had no choice. When I was 8 years old, my mother took myself and my older brother, and we had to sign up for this junior football league, Pee Wee football league. And, that's when I really found I love to hit other people. It put a smile on my face.
And I have to imagine that time you had no fear at that time, because it's funny because I started playing football. You never know it. I'm 5'8", and but I started playing football when I was in third grade. So we used to call it was a George Halas, or it was Pee Wee football, and it was the George Halas League, and it was also called. It wouldn't even be politically correct anymore. They used to call it midget football. So you think about that, So we've come a long way, or we were the mighty midgets actually. So. At any rate, that's something that you probably remember back at that time where you just had no fear, and you're like, I just really like to hit people hard. Funny, I kind of remember that.
Yeah, I did. And I love football. I mean, I love the Steelers. I mean, because you don't have any choice in Pittsburgh. That is the number one thing you do in life. You watch the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's probably a lot of sad Steelers fans out there after watching that game, losing the Cleveland Browns. But, football was such a big part of my life. I used to catch it, throw it, kick it. In fact, when I was 9 years old, I participated in the pass, punt, and kick competition, and I won the entire Pittsburgh area. I got a chance to participate in an NFL game in halftime. I remember it was the Washington football team. It was a call different something back then, but the Washington football team was playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, and at halftime I went out and passed, punted, and kicked off, and I won the Pittsburgh area, but this was nationwide. So there was somebody in the Midwest that had actually outkicked me, or whatever the point being. But football was a driving force in my life, and I got into high school and I started writing letters to Penn State, Joe Paterno. Could he please recruit me? And I didn't hear a response until after the season, and he came down and literally gave me back my letters and said, "Thank you, Doug. I've never received, emotional letters like this from anybody." And there was a newspaper article in the Pittsburgh Press, and the Ohio State coach saw it, Woody Hayes from Ohio State, and that's how I got to Ohio State. He was there the next weekend and offered me a scholarship.
We're visiting with Doug Plank, former NFL player, of course, number 46 with the Chicago Bears. You're listening to Sports Medicine Weekly. Steve Kashul, Dr. Brian Cole. It's great to have Doug on. So, Doug, what was your first real injury? Was it in youth football, high school football? And, of course, you're going to tell us a story about your first ever practice at Ohio State, right?
Absolutely. I mean, other than the stitches, I never gotten knocked out up until that point in time. I mean, no, I'm sorry, that was incorrect. I probably had 5 concussions while I was in high school. I never told anybody about it, though, and I wasn't literally knocked out. Only one time. My junior year, it was homecoming, and I woke up in the emergency room of a hospital that was 20 miles away. So that was my first serious concussion. The other ones were just where you were dazed. You lost your balance for momentarily. You couldn't remember who you were playing or where you were at. You still played football. You still were pounded in these plays. So you could still recite, and you knew what to do on each and every play as long as you were back to the huddle. But this got me to Ohio State. And injuries other than concussions, my very first day at Ohio State, we went out on the field and we practiced on AstroTurf, and I had never been on AstroTurf, and I found out within 30 minutes a practice which involved shorts and T-shirts for the freshmen turned into a full tackle scrimmage, and a player grabbed my knee. I was a running back at the time. Grabbed my knee, took me to the ground, and then rolled, and I kept hearing pops in my knee. I ruptured my MCL and my ACL the first day. Less than 30 minutes being there at Ohio State. So I had surgery. I was done for the year, and I came back a sophomore on Ohio State, 3rd or 4th team. I forget what it was. And it took me 3 years to even get on the field. My senior year, I was able to play because of another injury to another player, and I had a game of my life against Northwestern in Evanston, and a Chicago Bear scout came to the game.
I have to imagine that was treated with, they fix your MCL, the ligament on the inside of your knee, and then they threw you in a cast. Is that what you probably did, or was there?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really large, heavy cast, and you looked like you had come out of the war. I mean, you were limping around, you had crutches, and it was very humbling because I remember going back to my hometown looking like this. This is, again, this was probably early in the season, so I had only been there for maybe a month when I came back with this large cast on my leg, and everyone said, "See, I told you, don't go there. That place is way, way more valuable or has much more talent than you were capable of." And it was things like that. There were the words that I would hear. Words motivated me. Words made a difference in my life. And when people would say that to me, I would take on a determination like I never had in my life. And I was determined that if I ever get back on the field, I am never going to let anybody touch my knee again, and I'm going to play with incredible intensity like nobody else.
Let me take you back. Again, we're visiting with Doug Plank, former Chicago Bears safety. Dr. Cole, why did they cast a torn ligament in the knee back then?
Well, that was a time, Steve, that it was before we knew anything about reconstructing the ACLs. If you remember, we discussed Brian Piccolo, and we discussed Gale Sayers, and that was at that transition point where we didn't really know how to fix the ligament. So what we did is, I won't say we, because I was just a kid. So what was done was you would basically make an incision, fix the ligament on the inside, and then because we didn't have any good techniques to fix the anterior cruciate ligament, you put them in a cast for 6-8 weeks so they turned to stone. I mean, it's amazing that any athlete ever came back, quite frankly. Today that we have terrible time getting people back with this injury when they have a medial cloud ligament injury. And back then, I mean, I have to imagine it probably took you, 8, 12, 14 months to get back. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it wasn't as bad as having the full-on surgery. But we just didn't have the techniques available at that time.
You know what? I remember, that happened in the fall, in September, early September. And spring practice started in April the next year. And I remember I was a participant in spring football. And a lot of it, there wasn't a lot of cuts. And I was a defensive back, so I had to change direction a lot of times and burst and accelerate and stop. And I remember I was relentless in the weight room. I had never lifted weights. And when I say I became a different person, I did. This was almost like the mini Hulk commercial. Here's a guy that never lifted a weight, soft, and not anticipating what he was going to get at a major university like Ohio State. And after those injuries, I literally lived in the weight room, doing leg extensions. I didn't do a lot of heavy squats because I didn't want to put a lot of pressure on my back as well as my knees. But I was stronger than any other player on our football team as far as legs were concerned. Leg press, leg extension. I'll do anybody that was on our team. And I continued doing that. And I made decisions as I was going through my career, running down on kickoffs, because that's the only thing I had to do for 3 years because I wasn't playing. And I'd run down on kickoffs, and I was a straight-ahead guy. And if you got in my path, there was going to be a huge collision. And nobody was going to hit my knees. If they went down and try to chop my legs out, I would go as low as they did. So there was a lot of incredible collisions 1 foot off the ground. And I just protected my knees every chance I could throughout my remaining time with the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, we're visiting with former NFL player Doug Plank, wore number 46, of course, with the Chicago Bears. First Bears rookie to lead the team in tackles. So take us to NFL days then, Doug. And what was it like going from Ohio State to the NFL?
Ohio State was not just a university, but, as far as football was concerned, I don't want to say it was a factory, but they had facilities that I don't think any other NFL team at that time could compare to. They had great the locker rooms, from a facility standpoint. It was incredible. And when I came to Chicago Bears, they were renting a closed-down girls' school in Lake Forest, Illinois, in a situation where, just from a facility standpoint, I thought that, Ohio State certainly was much greater. It was bigger, and but it was something that, regardless of whatever the facilities are, and so many people sometimes think, well, this is not capable for me to do what I want to do in terms of improving myself. But everything is up to an individual, I think, and truly, if they don't like what they're seeing in front of them, they can go to get answers and consultations from other doctors, other people, and certainly the Bears were certainly open to that. But again, I think I realized what my limitations were, and I tried not to put myself in awkward situations many times to get physically harmed, and not in terms of getting hit on the side and things like that. I was fine with everything straight on collisions. Because what happened then, I just transferred whatever my first point of contact was my helmet. When you're running somewhere, your head is leading your body, and it's the most natural thing to have contact with someone else. So that's really how my style developed over the course of my career, was especially on special teams. I led the team on tackles, kickoff tackles, the 3 years that I was there at Ohio State, and that's a straight-on collision.
Was there anyone that you were compared to when you were playing in terms of the way you played? Like, who were some of the historic athletes that played as hard as you did and had this sort of philosophy that you have?
There was one person that a safety that was at Ohio State that really everybody tried to model themselves after. Jack Tatum. They wrote a book. They called me Assassin. I think everybody knows about him and his unfortunate situation. With hitting another player, and that was those were dark memories in terms of that incident happening. But when I got there, everyone was trying to be a Jack Tatum. I wasn't. I was just trying to do what I thought I could do. And when you're playing football, there's a lot of fear because all those people on the field are bigger than you are. They're mostly fast and strong. And you have to develop a sense of telling yourself that no matter what happens on this football field, you have to be able to do it. And I call it a suppression of your survival instinct, because we all have survival instincts when we're driving automobiles and big things are coming at us. We have a tendency to slow down to avoid it. And just the opposite happens on a football field. You have to try to block all those thoughts, and you have to be on a situation where you're running full speed and willing to run full speed into somebody else running at you doing the same thing.
Well, Doug, maybe next week we could go through, if you're willing to share with us, some of the surgeries that you had and then what's happened as your post-football life. And I think our listeners would love to hear what you're doing today, if you'd be willing to share that with us next.
Oh, I would love to. I mean, seriously, I love football. I mean, I'm so thankful I had an opportunity to do it. I still have my cracked Ohio State helmet that I cracked in my last game as a Buckeye in the Rose Bowl, and I hit a big man in the wedge. And after my helmet cracked, they taped it up with white tape and sent me back in the game to finish it. It's just the way things were back then. Everything was just taken as a consideration, and you just moved on.
All right, let's take a break right here, guys. And again, part 2 with Doug Plank next week here on Sports Medicine Weekly. When we come back, though, it's our Ask the Doctor segment. We thank Doug. And again, part 2 with Doug Plank next week. Stay with us. You're listening to Sports Medicine Weekly only on
670 The Score.